Slater, you're living in a tiny house and part of the tiny house movement. Could you show us how it works, how you put so much in such a little space that makes living doable and fun?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just lifting up my computer. So I live in Canada, so it gets cold in the wintertime. So I have this wood stove. Obviously, in the winter, I don't have plants on it,
Right.
but that keeps me nice and toasty in the winter. And let's see, it's 7.5 feet wide by 23 feet long. And I have a comfy chair, and I have a second loft where I do some of my work and keep all of my books. And this is kind of my kitchen. I'm going to be building some drawers that pull out. I've got a little sink area, and I've got my bathroom's a little bit messy at the moment, but I use a propane hot water heater, and I have a composting toilet,
Oh,
and I
wonderful.
actually have a cast iron bathtub, and my bed is up there. And yeah, I happen to live on a farm, so even though it's a really small space, I get to look out and see lots of different things. And my friends have also built a tiny house, which you could see in the background.
Oh,
I think why it was something I wanted to do is because I've spent a lot of time in the environmental and climate movement, and I really wanted to do something within my own life that I felt would make a difference, if only to, be living in a smaller space, to be more conscious of my waste and my consumption and the food that I eat. And I'm saving up to go off grid, which is taking a little bit of time because I'm a filmmaker and happy COVID for the past however many months. But I think what my friends and I feel is that we wanted to be more connected to things and experiences in our life that matter, and that we're not constantly in this struggle to maintain a life that is disconnected from other people and the planet.
mm-hmm. When what happens to the toilet waste matter? Can it be used for fertilizer?
Yeah, so what we do is we have a humanure compost system set up where, your bucket fills up and then you take it out to the humanure compost, and we cover it with various layers of like leaves and straw and other forms of compost. And in about 1 to 2 years, we'll be able to use it for fruit trees. Now, if you don't want to use it like with greens or stuff like that, but with a fruit tree, if you put it at the base, let's say, you've dug your hole, you're going to be putting the fruit tree in, and you put in some humanure, it'll actually have enough nutrients to keep it healthy and happy for the next 100 years. And so we're aware that we can't use it for everything, but we are planning on planting a food forest with different fruit trees and berries and whatnot. So it will be really useful in that sense.
Have you heard of the Bullet building in Seattle? I have pictures on one of my websites. It's everything is environmental, including the
Mm,
toilets and the toilet waste matter they make into compost in this neat little jars that they give to farmers. But
yeah,
that's a kind of a urban model of doing what you're trying to do. That I thought was really exciting.
no, that is very exciting.
Yeah.
I think we've been so. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, and was talking about this idea. Like, I think that we've all been born into a system and born into a society, and even basic things that are, part of what being alive is, like the waste that we produce or the food that we eat or the water we drink, for the majority of people, it's not something that we actually have any control over. And I find that really sad. And I find it sad that if you do want to be more involved in those things, it's considered something that's, alternative or weird or like out there. But I just actually feel more connected to my existence.
And the neat thing
So,
about it too is that organic farming sequesters carbon. So not only
yes.
does it give us healthy food and exercise and sunshine when we're working in the garden, but it sequesters carbon. So, and I
Yeah.
think it would feed a lot more people than factory farms do that are making soybeans or corn and feeding it to animals and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of birth, you and I were both born in Los Angeles and are, I think, happy not to be there now.
That's very true.
Where, when were you born? Month and
I
year?
was I was born in June 1992, and I was supposed to be born in September, but I was very early.
Wow. June what?
June 17th.
So you're Gemini, and
Mhm.
I'm a Gemini. I was born June 12th.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
what do you identify with the what they say about us that we're really interested in communication? Obviously, that's true for you. That we have fingers in a lot of pots, maybe dual personalities. Do you identify with any of that?
I do. I do think that as a Gemini, well, I mean, since I was a little girl, I've always been drawn to this idea of storytelling as a way to connect with other people and to hopefully change the world for the better. But I think stories at their heart are, this form of communication that allows us to learn about each other and what we care about. And I think it's really crucial. And as someone who is, I can go out into the world and be extroverted, but at the same time, need to, you know, I guess kind of recharge and not be around people. I find it really helpful that I guess I can go back and forth between those two, and it's very comfortable. And yeah, I think it has validity in how I live my life.
Do you know the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, Kiersey and Bates? I think, again, we're probably the same, that like I'm half extrovert and half introvert. And so I'm
Yeah.
happy teaching and giving public speeches and whatever. But like you, I need time by myself to recharge. Do you know the rest of your score on the Myers-Briggs personality?
Oh, it's been so long since I've done it. I don't remember, but I'll have to do it again.
Yeah, I'll send you a link. I love it because, and I think it's really so useful for groups when they're working together to understand. Oh, you're a J. You like to get things done. You like to check things off. Oh, you're a P. You don't like that. You like spontaneity, and you don't want to be put in a box. So when we have those different kinds of modalities, it keeps us from being judgmental. If we
Yeah,
understand, oh, it's not, one's not better than the other, they're just different modalities.
exactly.
So you started your environmental filmmaking when you interviewed Jean-Michel Cousteau when you were 11. How did that come about?
So my growing up in LA, my parents were also involved in media and the film industry, and their really good friend Jeannie Myers had started this project called the My Hero Project in the kind of infancy of the internet. And what she was trying to do is to create a place where her own children could go and find positive role models. And so from a young age, I was involved and I was interacting with, I guess, what would people who would become my mentors in filmmaking. And I was doing a story for school, I believe, on someone that inspired me, and it was Jean-Michel Cousteau and the work that he's done and the legacy that he's carried on from his father. And my hero ended up reaching out to him, and we were able to figure out how to have an in-person live interview. Um, and I think for me, that was the first moment where I really felt like I was taken seriously by adults and that my voice actually mattered. And it was beautiful. But I mean, the answer is always no until you ask.
And I love the symbolism of him passing the sea urchin baton on to you and to youth to educate the adults about the environment. So he got even then that youth were going to be at the forefront.
Well, and I think also recognizing, intergenerational collaboration, and I think that's a really crucial part in this as well.
That's a big switch to move from urban, trafficy LA to rural Ontario. What was that like moving when you were, what, 11 or so?
Yes, uh, I was I was thrilled, to be honest. When we arrived to this farm, it was, the one of the ugliest times of year. It's early April. Everything is kind of brown and muddy and has just kind of melted away all the winter snow, but spring hasn't really sprung yet. And we arrived at this time of year, and I remember just the space and the quiet and the stars at night and not hearing sirens and actually being able to see stars. And I felt immediately like I was home, that I felt connected to this land, and I've been in love with it ever since. And I think it's one of the things that is, I think, shaped my life and a lot of the choices that I've made, because sometimes it's just very important to me. I love feeling like I'm part of an ecosystem, and that I'm aware of little micro changes in the seasons that you can only get from living in nature for years and years. It's a really unique and beautiful thing, and when you get, I feel lucky enough and privileged to have been able to experience that and to be able to experience that, because I think a lot of people don't get that chance, and so they don't really, like, trying to protect the environment becomes something very almost like intellectual and abstract. And for me, I feel like I can see and taste and hear what it is.
Got it. I heard a story on NPR yesterday about city kids from poor neighborhoods going to a farm and being afraid to put their feet on the ground and be afraid there would be bugs and spiders and worms, and it was really a scary experience just to be on a farm. So
Yeah.
I know there's movements to get kids from urban areas out into nature because, as you say, it's so important as human beings. What was
Yes.
school like in rural Ontario for you?
Well, I actually I started out as a homeschooler, and then for a couple of years, and then I decided to go to an arts high school. But then after about a year, I decided that I wanted to go back to homeschooling, but to be a little bit more in charge of my education. And so I became an unschooler, and I found mentors in the fields that I was interested in, and worked with them and learned from them, and went to film festivals, and really just learned by doing. So I don't know if my education reflects the normal. It doesn't reflect what normal rural schooling looks like, but uh, luckily I had parents that trusted me, and my principal trusted me, to not just be at home and play video games or whatever, but to go out and learn. And I ended up, when I was 20, going to being accepted into the Canadian Film Centre Directors Lab residency, and I was their youngest ever director, and it's kind of like the Canadian version of the AFI. And so I think, yeah, I've definitely always taken the path less traveled, for
Mm-hmm.
better or worse.
Mm-hmm. And did that mean that if you didn't want to study trigonometry and calculus and French, that you didn't, or did you try to have like a potpourri of broad subject matter?
Yes, definitely. I I was curious about, and am curious about everything. I think what it did for me is I felt like I was becoming my mask in high school, if that makes any sense. And I didn't like the person that I was becoming, and I felt like I could learn what I was learning in school at home in a way that made more sense to me and felt like I was actually retaining that knowledge. And I also have always known I wanted to be in the arts and wanted to be a filmmaker, and from a young age had mentors and was kind of part of that world early on. So it wasn't that frightening to me to, not necessarily remember everything from calculus or trigonometry. When instead I, found producers and directors who I shadowed and worked with, and I made films with, and I made my own short films, and I, found master gardeners to learn gardening and botany from, and, just learned it in a more holistic way, I guess.
Fabulous. Do you have siblings?
No, I'm an only child.
That's a pattern. A lot of the people, little young women that I've talked to, are firstborn or only children.
Yeah.
Which is not surprising because they tend to be achievers. So let's look at your personal experience at the COPs. So I know you went to your first youth summit in Kobe, Japan in age 17. And that seemed like it was so important for you because it was so terrible and so disrespectful of youth, and not much happened. So that seems like it really motivated you to be on your path as an activist and documenting the youth climate movement. So is that an accurate portrayal of your experience in Japan?
Yes, I went with the hope that I think also with the expectation, we were led to believe that, we as young people, 116 youth from around the world, would be working together, not only with each other, but with our environmental ministers and with the people who were supposed to represent us. And I was actually 15, so I was very kind of naive and trusting, and a lot of my friends were too. And through this experience, I was learning about how they were already dealing with the climate crisis, friends from, Bangladesh and Indonesia and the Maldives. And so when it came time to interact with our leaders, I had all of this new excitement and knowledge from my friends who were suffering now, and to see that really the adults didn't care. They weren't interested in hearing their stories or collaborating or working together in any meaningful kind of way was shocking to me, and I think was the first moment that I realized that our leaders aren't these magical gods who have all of our best interests at heart, but are people too, and have flaws and have things on their agenda that maybe don't actually concern the problem. And I got really mad, and I didn't feel like I could go and chain myself to a nuclear reactor, but I did feel like I could go and film stories of young people who chose to do that, or go to UN conferences. And, I wanted to try to give them a voice and to give them a platform, because they felt like, it felt like the kinds of conversations that we needed to be having around climate change, around us as humans, this idea of, intergenerational justice, of social justice being woven into this problem, was not happening on an official level, and it was happening with young people. And I wanted to try to share that.
So you started filming for Youth Unstoppable in Japan in 2008 when you were 15. So
Yes.
It's been a long odyssey. And we'll talk more about where the film is now, but are you still adding to it, like to see what happens in November in the States with Trump? Because that's huge for the world's environmental problems.
It is huge and frightening.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like the film, we just went back into the film actually. In 2018, I was on a panel with Greta before she became Greta. And because one of my producers, he was married to a Swedish negotiator, and they were like, this girl really needs to, come and talk. And we were on a panel together, and we had footage from that. And then as the
Was
climate
that in
strikes
Poland? Excuse me, was that in Poland?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
in Poland in 2018. And as the climate strikes started really taking off around the world and we started filming them, we realized, my team and I, that, we had to go back into the film, because after working for over a decade on this film and seeing the kind of the hope of what the youth movement could be finally taking off, we had to have the film reflect that. But then, of course, COVID happened, and so we've got this film that's updated, but we're figuring out what the next steps are. I feel like we could work on this film forever, but I want to work on other projects, and I want to get this film out there and into the world and birth this project.
Got it. Well,
yeah.
Then next you went to Copenhagen in 2009, and you said that youth kind of found a cohesive voice there. It was discouraging and disappointing, but it united youth.
Yeah. Copenhagen was being kind of sold to the masses as this defining moment when the world would come together and we would come up with a plan and actually, start working on solutions and fixing this problem. And so a lot of people were devastated when it wasn't that at all. And so many people in like NGOs and youth climate groups and environmental organizations and whatnot were devastated after Copenhagen, because it was really just more of the same and more corporate interests being put over those of people who were actually suffering and dying. And it was frustrating that, here we were again, and we had actually been working towards this moment and it still didn't work. And what was it going to take? But I think for a lot of young people in that moment, we realized that I think what it did is it really solidified our resolve and made us realize that, regardless of what our leaders were going to do, regardless if there was an agreement, that someone had to keep going, and someone had to keep pressuring leaders, but also changing their own communities. And if they weren't going to do it, then we were, because no one else would. And it just kind of was there wasn't really a choice. There wasn't a choice of whether or not you keep going, because this is the most important thing that we as humans will ever face.
Right.
We're literally, staring our own mortality as a species in the face, and it's overwhelming and frightening, but it's also this opportunity to create real lasting change. Like, in order to survive, we have to become better people, and we have to raise each other up, and I think we couldn't give up on that.
Global youth climate movement is kind of an amorphous term. It's not exactly an organization. It's a grassroots sentiment. Did any kind of specific organizations come out of Copenhagen or Cancun the next year?
Well, Copenhagen was the first time that young people were actually recognized as a constituency. And so one of the important things that came out of Copenhagen was something called the Youngo, which is the kind of youth and future generations non-governmental organization. It's
through the
very
UN.
wordy.
Through
the UN. That was a big thing that came out of it. And it was kind of a focal point for different climate groups, different youth groups, different indigenous, social justice, environmental groups of young people to be able to come together and work together and kind of keep tabs on what was going on and figure out what was happening in the negotiations, but also in the real world. And so that was an important thing that came out of Copenhagen.
So do you still work with Ungo as an organization, or how does it actually get things done?
So whenever I interacted with Youngo, it's almost like a youth version of the UN itself in terms of negotiating, and in terms of it's a lot more policy oriented, and the groups that I kind of interact with most are not as much in that world. I am familiar with them because I had to film them and would show up, but a lot of the people that I followed or interacted with kind of go between both worlds of, official policy in the UN, but also on the ground grassroots action. And so they're still in existence, they're still going. We're still technically supposed to be ratcheting up every 5 years from COP21, but a lot of the people that I have been interacting with are, we're used to be global campaigners at Avaz.org, or the UK Youth Climate Coalition, or like independent groups in Maldives or Nepal or whatnot. Obviously also the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition, but yeah, no, it's strange because on the one hand, I'm incredibly frustrated with the UN and the way that they handle this this crisis, and how people talk to each other, and it's very frustrating, and it's very slow, and it's not as ambitious as it needs to be. And at the same time, it's the only global governing, like, it's the only platform where the whole world can come together. So I'm glad they exist and they need to exist, but at the same time, it's not where I spend all my time because it's so frustrating and overwhelming.
Right. In Cancun, I remember seeing videos of youth striking. They gave away their badges. We're not going to go participate because it's so meaningless. How did the movement move forward at Cancun?
I think what happened is, for a lot of people, it was this sense of this idea that, you have negotiators inside who are negotiating to allow, a 10-degree rise in temperature, or are pushing for their own country's interests above those of people who are actually dying. And it felt like, who are we to say which people and which cultures can survive? This is absurd and this is obscene, and I don't understand what's going on here. And I think a lot of young people were fed up and felt like it was the biggest way for them to, get on the news or have an impact on the negotiators, to like show them, like, actually what you're doing, we're not okay with this. And I think just over the years, there's become this kind of push towards more grassroots organizing, that we do need to interact with the UNFCCC, but also that, there is a power within ourselves and within the communities that we create. There's a power in Indigenous voices. And I think it's just more of a recognition and a coming together and a solidarity of, are we just a youth movement, or are we also in solidarity and working with these other groups? So I think it really just helped in terms of knowing our own identity and who we wanted to be and who we wanted to interact with, and, what was important and what actually, was going to get the attention that we needed in order to get things done. Because
do you stay in touch with some of the people you've known from previous COPs on Instagram or Twitter or some social media? Is there like ongoing, oh, try this, we did this and it was really worked, or don't do that kind of exchange?
So I'm friends with Jamie Margolin and I'm also friends with Katie Eder and Daphne Frias, and a lot of the younger, I guess, kind of the next generation of youth climate activists who are leading these organizations.
Zero Hour. Who are the other two involved with? I don't know their names.
So they work with This Is 0 Hour and Future Coalition, and are young women who are incredibly intelligent and passionate, and are working within these organizations to try to create change and grassroots action. So I do keep in touch with people. I've definitely been shifting more and more into, I guess, kind of the filmmaking side of things. I feel like a lot of what I can bring is almost a historical viewpoint to where they came from, because it's funny to me, but time and time again, young people don't realize that this movement has been happening since at least 1992, when Severin Suzuki called out the UN as a 12-year-old. And they think that the movement started with Greta, and she's an important figurehead, and she's important in the attention and energy that has kind of sparked this fight. But she isn't where it began. This has been going on for a while, and a lot of the things that Greta's been able to accomplish have been made possible because of my generation of activists who have laid the groundwork. And so I think a lot of what I'm trying to do, and my friends are trying to do, is create more of that intergenerational collaboration, even though it's, we're all technically youth. So yeah, I'm trying to interact with young people and show them where they've come from, and yeah, to be there as support and as a mentor, as I was mentored for so many years.
To keep going with our COPs chronology, people were pretty excited about Paris in 2015, the Paris Agreement, Paris Accord. You say in your film that Obama and indigenous people really made something happen. What was the effect of Paris on the youth climate movement?
Well, it's funny because when you make a film, you have to sometimes make choices about what is or isn't in it. Obviously, all the time, that's what defines it. But there was actually a lot of people were happy with the agreement, and the fact that for the first time in history, people came together and actually had a plan for moving forward. And it really is the only thing we have, but it is fairly basic. It's not even legally binding. And so there was also a lot of unhappiness with the document, because it didn't feel like it went far enough. But it's tricky, because you're not going to get everyone to sign a legally binding deal for some reason. And so I think the reason why I think it was so upsetting when the US left the Paris Agreement is the fact that it wasn't even really that intense. And it's like, it took over 20 years to get to a baseline of how we can move forward. And to then pull out from that just felt surreal, because it wasn't like, if you don't do this, then, you get a fine of this, or you go to jail, or whatever. It's like, these are our recommendations of how we'd like to move forward. So there's a lot of joy and a sense of victory in getting that agreement to actually start working, and not just talking about how we work together. But it also is frustrating, because the kind of change that we need in order to adapt and to survive as people is wide and sweeping, and really does require us to change the systems in which we live. We're looking for solutions to problems that we created, and we can't find those solutions in the same system that created the problems, if that makes any sense. Like,
Absolutely.
we have to start thinking a different way, and we have to be brave, and we have to be bold. And I don't feel like that is necessarily represented by the kinds of things that you see in the UNFCCC Paris Agreement.
Well, as I understand it, it set a goal, we're not going to go past 2 degrees centigrade. But what people have pointed out is we've already reached one with big disasters of Arctic melt and drought
Exactly.
and sea rise and extreme weather. So that's at 1. So to double that is asking for big trouble.
Well, and also the fact that after COP21 happened, the climate vulnerable nations came together and went to the IPCC and asked for them to do a report on the effects of 1.5 degrees. And I don't know if you remember this coming out in October of 2018.
Yeah, it was big.
Yeah, but essentially that, everything we thought was going to happen in 2050 or so is actually going to start happening a lot sooner than we thought, because obviously this has never happened before, and we don't have all the answers, and it's changing faster than we can adapt to it. But everything we thought was going to happen with 2 degrees and in 2050 at least is going to be happening very soon, like less than
now.
10 years.
Yeah.
And it's happening now.
And that report said we've got 12 years, that was in 2018, we've got 12 years to turn it around, or the tipping points are irreversible. So, I mean, whew, wow. And
12 years, which then translates to like maybe 4 or 5 because of politics and how slow we move.
Oh boy. What about Poland? Was that the last COP you were at in 2018?
No, I was actually in Madrid. Last year.
Oh, good. So, anything happen in Poland besides having a nice chat with Greta?
What happened in Poland? Yeah, I feel like I'm not as current and up to date with what's happening in COPs, because so many of the people that I interact with and were my contacts have moved on to different spaces to do their work, and are realizing that on the ground community, local action is really where it's at and where we need to be putting a lot of our focus. But yeah, it's very strange, because at the same time, with what's happened this year with COVID-19, it kind of made me feel hopeful and optimistic that things within our society that we thought were so immovable and structurally sound are actually quite flexible and not as stable as we thought. So it made me feel like, or start thinking about, well, if we can all adjust to this situation and this crisis the way that we have and move as quickly as we have been, then maybe we can do that with the climate crisis, which is not going away.
Right. There's not going to be a vaccine. What
No.
I always think about all global problems is we have the solutions. That's not the problem. The problem is the control of large corporations and the moneyed interests.
Yeah.
And as long as they're in control, we're not going to see major change. Well, what about Madrid? I know people were pretty frustrated there too. What was
I mean, is there ever really a COP that isn't frustrating?
Okay.
I feel like that
Fair
just
enough.
goes with the territory.
Okay. What was your experience in Madrid?
My experience in Madrid, so I was there, I was showing my film. I had a couple of workshops with young people outside of Madrid and Valencia and whatnot. I was there primarily as a filmmaker, but I also was there as part of one of our producing partners for the film, who gave us a grant that helped us to finish it, is the climate initiative Connect for Climate of the World Bank, which sounds bizarre and strange, but they're actually really good people.
Yeah.
And so I was there supporting them as well. And my experience was showing the film and connecting with people and, trying to have conversations that weren't necessarily taking the center fold, but, my friend is the behind the scenes campaign manager for Greta, and another friend is part of a, that we just kind of were talking about where we are as people and how we're going to move forward. And of course, a lot of those ideas and hopes for what this year would be have been put on hold for the moment. But
But what were those goals that you talked about? What do you want to see happen next, implemented?
in what, sorry?
You said that you talked about your kind of goals for the future, where to put priorities next. What specifics would you like to see happen? Do you think we're strategically powerful?
I think we need to support financing being put into alternative forms of energy. We need to support intergenerational and diverse collaboration and talk about, reshaping communities. And I think we need to do a lot of work surrounding the idea of regenerative agriculture, and regenerating the soil, because we have, at the rate we're going, we have 70 years left of soil actually being able to grow food, because of what we've done to it from monoculture. And so a lot of what I've been thinking about lately has been surrounding this idea of food. And so much of what I've been doing in the past has been related to the fossil fuel industry. And I've realized over the past couple of years that the thing that no one talks about that is just as bad is the industrial agriculture industry and how that affects everything. And yet it's kind of getting a free pass because everyone needs food. But
they're connected, because oil is used in the chemicals that fertilize corn or whatever.
Yes.
And
oh, totally.
So it's all entwined.
Yes. So I live in the country, obviously, and I'm surrounded by farming communities. And so what I'm trying to do with my friends is we're figuring out how to have conversations with these 8th and 9th generation farmers and talking to them about, I guess, kind of the future of farming and where it could potentially go and how they could be part of that, and, be able to meaningfully shift away from more of a fossil fuels based farming method and shift towards something that is more regenerative and works actually with the land and with the seasons and this idea of permaculture. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot.
Right.
It's not as sexy or as interesting, but it's
I think it's very
important.
Interesting, because what's more important than our soil? Well, and our air and our water. Another thing that I'm hearing.
And yet again, it's all interconnected. That's
Yes.
The thing about this whole issue, is that all people, all living things are interconnected and depend on each other, and everything that we do is part of this intricate web of existence. And yeah.
Right. Another thing that I'm hearing is taking account of people's mental health, preventing burnout, and that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if you're hearing that kind of discussion, and like someone like Greta, who's had so many mental health issues in her life, depression and eating disorders and being mute and autism spectrum, she must have ways of maintaining her health in the face of so much observation and criticism and trolling.
I mean, mental health is something that almost everyone I know within this movement struggles with, myself included, because it's incredibly overwhelming and frightening and disheartening. And it can be hard to realize that you can't help anyone unless you actually do make self-care a priority. I mean, I've experienced burnout, and friends of mine have experienced burnout. And I got to this point where I realized that no one had told me when I was younger that, there isn't just one dark night of the soul. There are many. And you get to the top of one mountain and you look around and there's a whole bunch of mountains. And the thing that we need to remember and that we need to embrace is that we're not robots, we're human beings, and we're emotional creatures, and we get tired, and this is overwhelming, and you can't do it all by yourself, but you need to take care of yourself and make sure that you're okay so that you can actually be part of this, because it's not, it's not something quick and a sprint that's going to be done soon. It's a marathon that is going to affect our entire lifetime. So everyone I know is struggling with this balance of, when do I take time to take care of myself, and becoming okay with doing that, and realizing that it's not selfish, and that it isn't, hurting other people, that you need to take time to be okay. And it's great that the conversation is becoming more open, because I think for a lot of people for a long time, the idea of burnout, or of being tired, or of needing to take a break, exactly, was viewed as something that, it was taboo. It's something you don't talk about. It's potentially a weakness that isn't supported. And thankfully the conversation's changing.
I just have a new book out called Calm, How to Thrive in Challenging Times, which it's a short book. I'll send it to you, and you can see if it would be of any interest to people that you know.
I would love that.
Okay.
I'd love that.
Yeah, it's very concrete. There's lots of suggestions. Why do you think it is, and has this always been this way since you started going to conferences in 2008, that young women are the leaders, the forefront? If you look at any group like the the World Bank, I looked at their list of staff people, and it was like 6 women and 3 men. And that's typical.
Yeah.
Why?
I think in the world of social justice and climate change, women from all backgrounds, this is going to sound like it's a side note, but it actually does make sense. I remember being at a film festival, and I was having a conversation with a mentor of mine, Lucy Walker, who's an amazing documentarian filmmaker.
She's British, right?
Yes. Or is she Australian? Anyway, Lucy is wonderful, and she was saying, there's a reason why there are so many women in documentary filmmaking, because there's less money, there's less fame, it takes longer, and you have to really be part of this small, tight-knit family of people who keep going, and who don't take no for an answer, and just keep going. And I think there is a resiliency and a level and degree of compassion and caring that does come more naturally to women. And I think that's why you see a lot of young women in social justice and the climate change movement, in, Black Lives Matter and whatnot, stepping forward and stepping up, because there is a strength and a resiliency there, and a desire to help other people.
Do you think that's kind of primarily biologically based, because women nurture babies, or do you think that we're socially conditioned in that way, or is it both nurture and nature? Any thoughts about why?
I think it depends on the person. I think it might be a combination. I think for some people it is, most women, as they're growing up as children, are taught to take care of baby dolls in the preparation to become mothers, which, for better or worse, can have an impact. But I think I don't really know the answer to this question, because I struggle with it myself. I wonder why it is that there are so many women, and I don't want to just put it down to it's just a biological drive and need to be caring and empathetic. But you do look around the world, and you see it's the mothers, it's the grandmothers, it's the women who are coming together. Look at New Zealand, look at some of the most exciting politicians as well are women. And I think what we're seeing is, in this time of climate crisis and of not really knowing what's going to happen next, that there is a shift taking place from a patriarchal kind of viewpoint to one that is more feminine and caring and of the earth. And you're seeing this empathy become something that is a superpower, that people are realizing that love is a solution. And I think women have been taught to be less afraid about sharing their emotions. So maybe it's a fluke of the way that we've been brought up, and it's given us this strength. But I do think that, I don't know, I think women can handle a lot more pain, and so are able to rise up in these kinds of instances.
This makes me think of Carl Jung, who said that Western culture has been dominated by logos, I think he called it, of intellect and patriarchy, but we're shifting out of that to a recognition of the great mother, the feminine archetype, the eros. So he sees that as a big historical shift, and that the patriarchy has hurt us and that limited us by being so unholistic. So we may be seeing part of this major cultural shift to a more holistic, egalitarian culture, which would be very exciting that we get to be part of it.
I think so. I mean, sorry, go on.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist?
100%.
Everybody says that, and that's a cultural shift, because when I was teaching women's studies a couple decades ago, my students would say, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equality.
I find it hard. I mean, believe me, I know that a lot of women don't call themselves feminists, but there's a part of me that feels that if you are a woman or you're female identifying, I don't understand how you couldn't be a feminist, because you simply are in existence. And I don't know, maybe it's tied to the way that we view ourselves and self-love and the support that goes along with that. There is a lot of negativity it's so strange.
Well, and it's also in men's best interest, because the traditional stereotype male role, you have to achieve, perform, work, they die younger than women. So it's in men's best interest to have a more shared culture. I think you have one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is you have a unique perspective on the global youth climate movement. And now when teens are coming up that are Generation Y, in other interviews you've said that this generation is more confident, they emphasize global justice, their language is different. Could you elaborate on that? How do you see any differences in Gen Z than your Gen Y?
Right. So a lot of what I'm seeing is, when I was, 15, 16, there was social media, there was the internet, there was this growing sense of, I don't want to say collective consciousness, but of community beyond borders, of community beyond your physical location. Oh my God, sorry. What do you have on your nose? My chickens have recently gone free range, and so their egg laying is also free range, and my dog is obsessed with finding their eggs. And what were you doing?
I just had 2 baby chicks hatch, so I feel they're so cute.
I love them. They're so weird. I just love them.
And they have personalities, and that always makes me think of the chicken egg factories where their beaks are cut off and they're squished together, and because I know they have personalities, and one's more this and one, they'll hop up on my chair and talk to me.
Yeah. I mean, it all just is going back to this sense of we're just one part of this really beautiful and diverse world, and I can't help but feel like that kind of idea is at the center of so many different ways of thinking that are just kind of inherently embraced by the next generation, who are realizing, whatever your sexual orientation or your gender or your, background or language or the color of your skin, that ultimately we're all human and we're all part of this global family. And, we are so beautifully diverse. And, why wouldn't you accept, why would not accept isn't the word, why wouldn't you embrace this ever-changing and evolving community of other people that simply show the beautiful, diverse possibilities of what it means to be alive?
It's a lot more interesting.
It is a lot more interesting, and I feel like it's a lot, what is it? I think there's a bravery that comes out of that because, from being so vocal, from being able to communicate, from seeing that, you don't have to be within one label or one box, that you can just be you and you can be a human and you can interact with other humans. And when you start living and experiencing the world in that way, and you start communicating in that way of openness, of wanting to embrace other people, of love as a solution, I feel like it just makes sense that in order for us to be the best people we can be, that we would bring everyone up together. That, why wouldn't you want clean air, clean water, better jobs, more innovation, to be happier, to be part of a community? I think we're really starting to understand that, we have to reconnect to each other and we have to reconnect to the planet, and that's how we're going to move forward.
Well, say a little bit more about their language has changed. Mm-hmm. How so?
The language has become a lot more inclusive.
Like pronouns, they, their, instead of he, she.
Yes, but also instead of just youth, it's also, trying to get to a place where it's not just the youth climate movement. In a way, it's like, we're starting to be part of, indigenous movements and BIPOC movements and, women's rights and social justice. It's not just young people anymore. We're realizing that everybody's actually, we need to all work together and we'll be able to better achieve all of our goals together, as opposed to being in our own bubbles, in our own silos. It's more of a holistic approach to learning and to exploring and to creating solutions. And so you see that in the language because I think there's a lot more comfort and acceptance of the idea that, we all work together because it makes sense, because it feels right. We're more accepting because why wouldn't you be? Because of, I feel like I'm very open-minded in my life and in the way that I choose to live my life and in the language that I choose. But I almost feel like it's because I was able to be the way that I am. It's an accumulation. It's an accumulation, I think, of realizing that we're not so different.
Do you think that kind of change in emphasis to being...
Sorry, I just realized a completely better way of saying it. Because of... I'm going to drink some coffee.
Okay.
Because of social media, because there is community beyond borders, because, we're starting to realize that we are all part of this one global family. I think that, coupled with the fact that you're living in this time of the climate crisis, realizing that we only have so many years before we can't actually fix this problem, I feel like that has inherently made young people grow up faster. And I think it's inherently made young people think in a more inclusive and, dare I say, philosophical manner, because you have, issue after issue after issue, all of them basically saying your future is going to be terrible. You don't have a future. The world is dying. animals are dying. There's a lot of pain and there's a lot of suffering that is just free floating in the world, this anxiety. And I think because they've grown up in that and they've had to grow up faster and they've had to take charge because adults won't, there is a lot more comfort in being in that leadership role and a lot more comfort with the idea that we do have to change everything because there is no choice. I think it's that much more inherent and accepted and widespread because, this is going to affect the rest of their lives and this is going to affect the rest of my life. But I feel like there was a little bit more of a glimmer of hope, whether or not it was real as I was growing up. And I think for them, it's like, we're the only ones who are going to fix this. And so they've had to step into that role.
What I think of is that there's, I don't know, 3 billion people who don't have access to internet. So
Yes.
we have this big divide between people who know what's going on. But for other books, I've interviewed village kids in Pakistan. They didn't know the concept global warming.
No.
The most technology they had was a radio and a cell phone, but that's it.
They might not know the name, but they know that the way that they live is changing.
Maybe. Yeah.
I remember I was in a village in Nepal and I was speaking to a woman who didn't know the term climate change, but she did know that they didn't get as much water as they used to or when she was a child, and that things had got harder and that summers were more hot. And it's interesting that, I don't know, you're right, there is a divide, and that is part of the social justice that inherently goes with climate justice, because we should all have access to we should all have our basic needs met, and we should all be able to be part of this consciousness shift that's taking place.
The other side of this is college counselors and other psychologists were talking about youth as fragile teacups, dominated by their helicopter parents who would go with them to job interviews and call up the professor. My child got a C. What's going on here? So there's this kind of this Gen Z as strength and leaders, and Gen Z as anxious, unable to cope on their own. What's going on there, do you think?
I guess I feel like it goes back to what we were talking about. I think it's both. I think you do have a generation of young people who are leaders and who are rising to the challenge, but I think there's a lot more comfort with this idea of being vulnerable and that that's okay. And so, of course, you're going to see that there is anxiety and depression, but it's also spiking because we're literally looking at the end of the world as we know it. I mean, we're not robots. This is distressing and this is overwhelming. The fact that, I will probably never be able to own a house, the fact that I have never had a stable job, and, all of these things that line up are overwhelming. And the sense of security and stability that, was felt by previous generations is actually part of this very small bubble of time of like this golden period where, fossil fuels were okay, but also, and making money and this certain type of success was encouraged. But at the same time, the climate crisis wasn't really known or worried about. You didn't worry about this. You didn't think the world was ending.
Right. We kind of raised to believe it just gets better and better, not it gets worse and worse.
And so for us, it's like this sense of how can we be expected to be able to have the same kind of security and stability that previous generations, really only the past couple of generations, were able to experience when, the playing field has completely changed. Houses are more expensive and yet jobs pay the same. It's like
college tuition. It's even expensive in Canada. It's
Yeah,
not.
it
Yeah.
is. Toronto's housing market is just as inflated and bad as New York. Um, it's like, how can we be expected to succeed the way that our parents did when those opportunities don't exist?
And you graduate with $35,000 in debt from
At
university,
least.
at least. Yeah. And that's true in Canada as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of your
But we do
films.
have healthcare, which is great.
Oh yes, right. You don't pay anything. There's no co-pays, right? You just show your card and go to a doctor.
Yeah. Well, the what I always bring up as an example of it was I didn't have my tonsils taken out, and I got tonsillitis and my throat started closing, and my mom drove me to the hospital, and I was, taken in because obviously if it's an emergency, you're not going to be waiting. I've had to wait when I thought my wrist was broken, but it wasn't a life-threatening thing. For this, I immediately went in. I was put on a cocktail of steroids and various things and antibiotics and whatnot. And I was put on they were like, well, you can come to the hospital each day and you're going to have what is it? Like I had an IV bag. I had a movable IV bag that like just was kind of in this almost like fanny pack that I wore around, and I needed to be on that for 3 days. And they're like, you can come to the hospital each day for 3 days and we'll change your needle, or we can have a nurse come out to you each day
Wow.
free of charge. And so I live on a farm, and every day I had a nurse come and change my needle. And at the end of the 3 days, it was all picked up and I didn't have to pay anything.
That would never happen here. Never.
I mean,
The closest we'd come would be telemedicine, but you can't remove a needle through the computer. I want to make sure we talk about your films. So, an Inconvenient Youth in 2012, was that like the precursor to Youth Unstoppable?
yeah, that was like the kind of a short film that, because along the way I would make short films kind of as an editing exercise, but also to for my friends to be able to use in the youth climate movement as kind of like tools and to connect with other young people. So An Inconvenient Youth was what the project originally was. And then it went through a couple of title changes. One of them was Another World is Possible. And then that became Youth Unstoppable. And because that's one of the chants, and it also just had a better ring to it.
Mm-hmm. And then what about Off the Grid, Planning Season, Still, Alice, Cold Deck? What were the themes in your others? And I also read that you're starting on a fiction, your first non-documentary film. Is that right?
Yes, I'm writing that at the moment. It's kind of an elevated horror feature because I kind of feel like genre films are potentially this kind of modern take on mythology, with you have certain tropes and expectations from each genre that audiences look for, and what's really fun is to then take that and mess with it and explore bigger ideas by putting them kind of in a candy wrapper.
Would
So
like Hunger Games and Divergent fit in that genre or not?
I don't think so. It'd be more like the Babadook or Midsummer, like that kind of, yeah, like it could be seen just as like that's a horror movie, but like with the Babadook, it actually is kind of, it explores depression. And with Midsummer, it's about, a breakup, and it's I guess I'm just really intrigued by that.
And what about?
So the other things that you mentioned, Cold Deck was a paid gig. It wasn't really my project, but the other ones, yeah, simultaneous to this doc going on, I also am a fictional writer and director, and I love being able to create worlds that I can explore ideas in, and it's just what I've always loved since I was a little girl. I mean, before I could talk, I would go into the library and find foreign language films and watch them without knowing what was going on, and I've just always loved that. And so yeah, I just have been making short films and getting better at my craft, and went to the Canadian Film Centre for school, and have been working with filmmakers and artists up here, and yeah, I'm working on my feature.
What about Still? It was about domestic violence, I read.
So Still was a short film that I made coming out of the Canadian Film Centre, and it actually went on to be one of Canada's top 10 short films of that year. And yeah, it was essentially, I wanted to explore the kind of patterns of domestic violence and why it is that we, I think, sometimes we'll look for our sense of identity in other people, even, to our detriment. And, but what I did with that is essentially this young woman and her boyfriend get lost in the woods in the wintertime, and are trying to find their way to a neighbor or a gas station, and he ends up going through the ice, and she panics and runs back into the woods and finds duplicates of themselves, but if they weren't in a abusive relationship. And I just wanted to explore what it's like when we get trapped in the patterns that we create for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And it was also fun to do it in a kind of sci-fi way, because that's the kind of stuff that makes me excited and happy.
Do you ever act in your own films, or you're not interested in that?
It's funny that you say that, because I recently made a short film during lockdown. I was one of 9 female filmmakers from around the world, each of us making a short film to be part of kind of an anthology, and exploring the sense of isolation or things that we were worried about during this time. And so my godfather is a really great actor, and is well known up here, Derek McGrath, and he lives on the farm. And so I ended up writing this short film that he and I acted in, where I was taking care of him as my sick dad, and my friends who live on the farm as well, and tiny houses that they built are all in the film industry or artists. And so we kind of had this little production studio that just kind of popped up that was really fun to play with. So I did act in that, and I did really enjoy it, but I also love being behind the camera.
Well, it's nice to have both, and that Jim and I, one twin can act and one twin can direct.
Exactly.
Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Any kind of changes or steady state filmmaking working on the farm?
The farm is definitely a huge part of my life, and what I'm working on with my friends is to create, we've already started kind of exploring the idea of the farm also being a creative studio. We are planning and planting a food forest to be sustainable and to explore permaculture and potentially create short films, short, I guess, kind of informational films to show how one can be more connected to nature and the environment, and to growing their own food regardless of where they are and what they have. I am also hoping to be more involved in fictional filmmaking. I mean, we'll see what happens. It's everything feels a little bit up in the air at the moment. Until we have a vaccine, until we know how we can have groups of people making things again. So until I know what's going to happen, I'm primarily focused on writing and being sustainable and farming.
What does your wrist say?
Oh, it says, I'm a tear the sun lets fall.
Say again, I am a tear in.
I am a tear the sun lets fall.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Um, Last question. What do you do to renew yourself? I mean, I'm assuming that just having your hands in the soil and talking to the chickens is self-care. Anything else that you do to charge your batteries?
Um, I also have cats who I love, that are my friends, and all my animals and I go on walks together.
Oh, your cat goes too?
Yeah, he's absurd.
Come here. My cat
Um,
wants to say hi. Come here. Come here. Oh,
uh-oh. Hello.
say hi.
Hi. Wow. So pretty. So handsome.
She's 17.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yep. Okay, sorry, I was rudely
No.
interrupted you.
No.
Because it was so perfect. You were talking about cats, and she walked in meowing.
It's lovely. What I do for self-care, I play music, so I play the violin, and I find that very comforting and calming. I also am a voracious reader and gardener, and um, I also love cooking and baking. I'm a big baker.
Me too.
And yeah, just finding ways to feel, I guess, more connected to myself, and to be less reliant on technology, and having that almost like replace a sense of community. Yeah, film, music, gardening. I'm looking forward to the time when I can go back to boxing and swing dancing, but who knows when that will be. Okay, again.
You've got to see my swing dance videos on my YouTube channel. I love to
I
swing dance.
I love it.
Do you know West Coast? Do you do
Yes.
West Coast swing?
Yes, I really want to learn. Is it Hellzapoppin'?
I don't know.
It's the one of the earlier iterations where there were a lot of like aerials involved.
I love aerials. I love lifts. My dance teacher is very strong and very big, so we do lifts all the time. It's so much fun.
Fantastic. It's fantastic.
I'll send you some links. Anything else that that you think we've missed in terms of climate change activism, youth role, where we're headed, advice to someone who's starting out?
Potentially just at this moment, I don't really know. What do you feel? I feel like I was a rambling mess,
Oh
but
no, I feel it was very, because as I said, you have a unique perspective of being in the movement since you were 15. So I mean, it's very meaningful and exciting to talk with you. So
well,
thank
thank you.
you.